Hello and welcome to Harboring Chaos. Happy belated Mother's Day. Mother's Day was last Sunday. Hope you all had a nice Mother's Day. Today we are going to talk a lot about language. Language is going to be a recurring theme on this channel. And I think that language is probably top three most important philosophical subjects or topics. Language is something that us humans tend to kind of overlook in terms of its importance and its what it is. And I do think because of our failure to appreciate and to understand language, we find ourselves in a lot of turmoil or conflicts with one another. So today I will talk a lot about language, and we will continue to talk a lot about language in subsequent videos as well. But again, happy Mother's Day. Also, a few weeks ago, Maria and I went to a party, and I've been meaning to make this video and actually talk about our experience at that party. It just so happens that our experience at that party led me to want to talk about language, and Mother's Day last week, of course, made me also think about making this video and talk a lot about language as well. Okay, so I'm going to try to tie it all in together. So what happened at that party? Well, this party took place on the outskirts of Austin, and in a smaller town, and this area is very conservative. Okay, where we were partying, right? In fact, when we parked our car and started walking up to this house party, there was a truck parked right outside. Obviously, the person who parked that truck right outside of this party was at that party. But this truck had a bunch of bumper stickers that had, like, I remember one bumper sticker said, like, F-U-C-K Biden. Another bumper sticker said, COVID is a hoax. Other bumper stickers, I'm sure it had bumper stickers like "Don't tread on me" or something like that. I think there was a bumper sticker with a gun on it or something, right? But it had at least 15-20 bumper stickers on this truck. Very right-wing, ultra-conservative bumper stickers. So we knew what we were getting ourselves into when we were going to this party, right? So we walked in to, at this, we had a good time, right? These are people I've known forever, people I consider friends. Longtime friends, right? A lot of them very right-leaning, very conservative. So a few things. So I remember some of the kids, we played around with some of the kids, talked to some of the kids, right? Talked to their parents. Their parents are, our friends. And I remember, and a lot of people I didn't know either, right? I just remember one teenage kid probably, had a hat on. Actually, I didn't see this kid, but Maria told me that this kid had a hat on that had a gun, an AR-15, and I think the words "We the People," right? The lead singer of the band that was playing there, a friend of mine, had a shirt on that said "Freedom," right? He was wearing a shirt that says "Freedom." And I know this lead singer, he's a friend of mine, I've known him forever. I know him to be conservative, pretty hardcore Christian conservative, right? Probably a Trump supporter, right? But anyway, so he was wearing a shirt, "Freedom," and there's a lot of people wearing stuff that, like, camouflage and things that definitely suggested that we were at a very conservative venue or party. Okay, so from that experience, I've been meaning to do this video where for me, I've been thinking about this a lot, right? Which is like stuff like even the words "We the People," or the symbol of a bullet or a gun, right? Even the word "freedom." Not too long ago I saw Erica Kirk, like some image floating around where she's doing a podcast or so, and she's for Turning Point USA, and I know she often wears a cap with the word "freedom" on it, right? Like all black, with black letters, right? Very sleek looking, very cool looking, right? Hat. So that's like this whole right-wing branding, right? Freedom. And in this case, for Turning Point, Erica Kirk and all that, you know, they're catering towards like younger people, right? And they're getting them to support this notion of freedom and right-wing conservative ideology, right? And so, you know, I've been thinking about this a lot recently, where it's like, for as a progressive, right, as someone who considers himself super progressive, for years now. Actually, I remember even talking to a friend of mine. Actually, this friend's from another country, from France. A long time ago, this friend of mine told me how I'm trying to remember the whole conversation, but it was about how Americans hang their flags, or hang our flags quite often, right? So even to this day, Maria and I, you know, we'll be driving somewhere and we'll see, you know, a house or something, you know, front yard. There'll be like a huge USA flag. Oh, not too long ago, we were driving through, I think, North Carolina. There was a huge Confederate flag hanging, right? Anyways, this notion of flag hanging, going back to this conversation I had with a friend of mine many years ago. This friend of mine's from France, and this friend of mine asked me something like, or said something along the lines of like how she doesn't understand why Americans love hanging their flags. And I think it was her that reminded me, like, this idea of how it's okay to hang flags, but especially, you know, during times of war, or you know, or when times are really, really tough and challenging, and maybe you want to hang an American flag because you want to, you know, boost morale and show solidarity and unity, right? Like, you know, we think back to World War I and World War II, when things were much bleaker, and you know what, Rosie the Riveter and stuff like that, you know, where there was a drive to get Americans to kind of unite around certain imagery and stuff like that, right? So anyways, it reminds me of that, and I'm thinking it's not it's not the worst thing to hang a flag, but sometimes when we hang flags and stuff, to me it makes more sense than maybe now, when a lot of people, especially right-wing, ultra-conservative people, are hanging their flags, right? So I bring this up because, again, language, right? Like, the idea of hanging a flag is in a way kind of making, in a way, us making a statement, right? Us communicating somehow, right? And so this is related to language, okay? So, you know, kids wearing a hat that has an AR-15 and saying "We the People," right? Obviously, this is branding and slogans and stuff like that, right? Heavily tied to language and how people are using language, right? And again, as a ultra progressive person, I've always hesitated, or I've always never understood why people wear shirts that say, or hats that say "We the People," or have a bumper sticker that has like a 50 caliber on it, or something that says "We the People." And I quite honestly never understood why people have like, or hang their flag so often, right? Because I don't think we are at a time where, you know, we are in a World War II or World War III situation, right? Now, so I've always hesitated to adorn clothing that say stuff like freedom or that kind of stuff. Now, there are situations where I want to wear stuff to express my political beliefs. You know, I've been known to wear stuff like shirts with Kamala Harris, you know, campaign, slogans on there, right? I've been known to wear shirts with the pride flag on there, right? Black Lives Matter, you know, slogan on there as well, right? So don't get me wrong, I believe that we should wear these things if you believe strongly about something, right? I'm all for that. You know, on my car I have a Minnesota Viking license plate placard, right? I still have a Biden Harris bumper sticker. So I'm all for this notion of expressing or showing your pride in terms of what you believe in, okay? So I'm not against this idea of expressing who you are, okay? But I also am against, me personally, wearing a shirt that just says freedom on it, or I feel uncomfortable when I'm around conservatives that wear a shirt that has a flag on it. And here, I'll be honest, even when I go to a sports event and we're doing the national anthem, I feel uncomfortable standing next to people who are ultra conservative while they rise for the national anthem, and I'm rising because I know our values don't really align, right? I'll talk more about that in a little bit. My suggestion on what we should do, right? But anyway, so going back to the language thing, right? So I've always, me as an ultra progressive, I've always been hesitant to just use words like freedom and even words like God, symbols like the flag, right? In such a kind of a thoughtless or what is it, monopolizing kind of way, right? Because I know that the word freedom varies depending on who you are, like this idea of freedom, right? Freedom means different things to different people. So does God, right? Even hoisting or hanging a flag means different things. To me, like the flag, this idea of America, like for me as an ultra progressive, I want to share America to more people. I want to have more immigrants come over here, right? I do believe that people who are ultra conservative, more on the right, oftentimes they're like, the flag represents their land and only their land, and they're kind of people, you know? So in a way, I feel like when you're ultra conservative, a lot of times when you hang a flag, it's your way of saying, this is for me and my people. And so that's why I kind of like not like when conservatives use that symbol so much, right? When we talk about the word freedom, I believe that truly or more intellectual people, they're hesitant to just use the word freedom so carelessly, because true freedom doesn't ever really exist anywhere, right? The definition of freedom, you know, to be free, but nothing is truly fully free, right? Everything is kind of dependent on one another, depends on one another, relies on other things, right? So nothing is truly independent or free. Everything is kind of dependent and interrelated and interdependent. So real intellectual people or more thoughtful people will actually maybe break down freedom in different ways and be like, you know, I believe in freedom in this sense. You know, freedom, you know, what is it called? Not unrestrained or not unfettered freedom, but just limited freedom, right? So yes, you're free to maybe live in this country, but you're not free to just do whatever the hell you want, right? Also, I tend to believe, like, I'm gonna err on the side of providing more freedom to maybe poorer or weaker people as opposed to wealthier, more powerful people, because I do think, you know, power tends to corrupt, and if you give very powerful people and, you know, more freedom, they're just gonna, you know, use their power to tap into, you know, along with their greed, to just tap into the, you know, like the system more and benefit more, and you know, that's when you have richer, more powerful people become even richer and more powerful, etc., right? So I'm gonna always err on the side of maybe more freedom to weaker, poorer people than wealthier, right? So along those lines, like for me, the notion of freedom, it's like maybe women's reproductive rights, freedom of religion, in the sense that, you know, like we all should be free to believe what we want, just don't necessarily act out on our beliefs, right? But that includes, you know, allowing Muslims to believe what they believe, Buddhists to believe what they believe, Jews to believe what they believe, all sorts of stuff, right? And at least be more humble and be able to share that space of religion with everyone, as opposed to maybe white nationalists who, Christian nationalists who are like, you know, they don't want people to maybe have as much freedom to believe what they want unless it's Christianity or something, right? Or in the case of, you know, white nationalists, you know, they're less prone to wanting freedom for immigrants, right? Even undocumented people. I want undocumented people to feel more free. I'll give you not only more freedom to live here, but, you know, a path to become documented, that kind of stuff, right? Of course, I already touched on women's reproductive rights. Like, I believe in that kind of freedom, right? So anyways, freedom is a very nuanced, complicated thing. Because of that, I'm not just gonna wear a shirt that says freedom, right? But I do think people who tend to be more conservative, they don't think like that. They tend to monopolize things. They tend to be like, freedom, this is the only freedom, it's my kind of freedom, and the other kind of freedom, you don't have access to freedom. It's my way or the highway, right? They tend to be more like that, you know? even when it comes to stuff like religion or God, right? It's like I do think more conservative people tend to think that their religion, their God, is the only right religion and right God, right? And so again, I would never wear a shirt that just says God, because I'm like, look, you have a God, he has a God, she has a God, we all have God. So can we just spare each other of all wearing a shirt that says God on it, and just respect that we all have different gods, right? Same thing with religion, right? So because we all have different notions of religion, let's just, I guess maybe have discourse on it. But when you just wear a shirt that says freedom, like, what freedom are you talking about? You know what I mean? You have to be clear about that. And I'll talk more about my suggestion on what we should do as a progressive in a little bit, in terms of wearing shirts that say freedom and maybe hanging a flag and stuff, right? Anyway, so all this ties back to how language is very complex, how we use language, right? But I'll also say this, right? We need to change how we're using language, and we need to have a deeper appreciation for what language is, right? So let me just back up a little bit. So this video might be getting a little long. I think I'm gonna need another 15 minutes to kind of walk through things here. But so let's start with my view of language, right? Or ways in which I view language. So just to give you an example, so Maria and I recently adopted or rescued two guinea pigs, right? Real cute guinea pigs. And there's no question that they have their own language. In fact, if you were to look up guinea pig noises or whatever, right, you're gonna definitely find them super adorable. They make the cutest sounds, right, when they're talking to each other. But every morning when I wake up, as soon as they hear me make a noise when I come out of the room, they start using their teeth to start grabbing on their cage, and they start basically just like shaking their cage, both of them together in unison, and basically trying to get my attention and saying, hey, come and feed me immediately, right? They do so in the cutest way, right? But that's their way of communicating to me. So interestingly enough, it's like two guinea pigs and a human are able to communicate with one another using some kind of language, right? So to me, language is basically just two things communicating, right? And keep in mind, those two things could be within the same body for that matter. So like my hand communicates with, my eyes through my central nervous system, right? So both of these things, my hand and my eyes, they belong to the same body, but they're still two different things communicating to one another. When we talk about, other things like computer systems and stuff like that, right? It could be two applications or two computers communicating to one another using some kind of protocol or some kind of language, right? So language is just two things communicating with one another, right? Now, the thing is that we kind of also forget that when it comes to humans, right? Homo sapiens, right? Our species, we share, for the most part, a language that's human language, right? And obviously, depending on where you're from, the human language might change, right? Like if you live in America, oftentimes it's either English or Spanish, right? And the reason why it's English and Spanish is because of a lot of times it's because of where we were raised, where we were born, where we learned to speak to one another, to communicate to one another. But our anatomy, right? Because of our mouths and stuff like that, we're able to enunciate or to say, to basically speak or pronounce certain words and stuff, right? Because we have similar physiology, similar anatomy, right? So we're able to use human language in very similar ways, right? So because of that, we think we speak the same language, and we fail to remember that language is not just the sounds that we make towards one another, right? Earlier I said that language is, two things communicating with one another, right? That is one level of language. That's how I define language at the first level. But there's a second level I'm going to add to it, right? That makes it a little bit more interesting. Language is not only two things communicating with one another, right? But if these two things have values, okay? If they have values, language is not only how these two things communicate with one another, but what they intend, what their intentions are when they communicate as well, okay? Okay, so let that sink in for a little bit, okay? So now I just injected this idea of values. One day, actually not just one day, but many other videos, I'll talk about this notion of values and preferences, right? at the superficial level, like whether or not I like spicy food or you know, I don't know, sweet foods or whatever, what I value, what I prefer, but more deeper stuff, like whether or not I value, you know, winning, or maybe fighting a more what I prefer or what I value as a more noble and maybe I don't know, upstanding kind of battle, right? Instead of just valuing winning by playing dirty, maybe I value losing but playing fairly or compassionately or something like that, right? Anyway, so it's values is very important, right? What we value. You know, computer systems, at least not yet, you know, with AI, they're going to start having values. They're going to start having things that they prefer in values, right? But and guinea pigs, when they talk to me, they value feeding their bellies, right? And I value their cuteness or whatever, right? So when and I value their health too, so I'm willing to feed them, right? So my point here is that when two things communicate, they also have their own values, okay? That is super important, because it turns out we fail to recognize or to remember that we do share a language in terms of the words with other humans, but we often don't share the same values, okay? So again, I'm super progressive. I know people who are super conservative. Our values are not similar, okay? And that's why, to me, sometimes, like during the national anthem, right? At a sports event, right? At the beginning of the game, you know, we stand up, or maybe in the 7th inning, we rise to do the national anthem. Sometimes I feel uncomfortable because I know that people right next to me are going to stand and salute the national anthem, but our values are not the same, right? So when someone wears a shirt that says freedom, I'm like, you don't value the freedom the way I value freedom, or your values are so different that the way you value, I mean, because your values are so different, you want freedom in a different way that would manifest differently from how I value things and how I would want freedom to manifest, right? So we're using the same words with the same letters, right? Freedom, but wow, like how we really intend for that word to manifest and be used and to be experienced, it's completely different, right? So another thing about like this notion of sharing a language, sharing a reality, right? Sharing a world, right, with each other. I do think as a progressive, we have to be very careful, because we are getting our asses kicked on so many levels by conservatives, because we underestimate how when they live in this world. I think in general, to be conservative, you're more inclined to want to conserve things yourself, but also to maybe even monopolize and you're less likely to share even, right? In another video, I'll talk about this notion of conservative and being progressive or being liberal. I do think you need a balance, right? But where we're at right now, we're probably overly conservative, and there are a lot of people who are too conservative for my taste or for my values, right? So I say that because, I mean, the analogy I like to use is just like two analogies, right? America, more progressive, more liberal, want to share what we have in this country. Like when I'm driving across states, I see so much land, and I'm like, a lot of people just literally stole this land, inherited whatever, and they're not even willing to share it, and they're literally just land. Or there are people from other countries, they're fighting for land and resources, and everything's overcrowded, and we can't even share this abundance of land with them because we're too conservative, right? Another example of like how I view conservatives or ultra conservatism, right, is just small things, like even the roads that we share, right? Conservatives drive these huge trucks, tearing up all the roads, and gas guzzling trucks, right, that harm the environment and stuff like that. But they don't care. They are here to take, right? They could care less about other people that they're sharing the roads with, right? People that I consider who are more progressive, they're a little bit more conscientious about what they use or what they consume, right? They're not going to deny climate change. They're not going to pretend that it doesn't exist, right? They're going to think about, future generations. They're going to think about the roads that they use. They're going to maybe drive a smaller car for one, right? Use less gas, right? That kind of stuff, right? But conservatives, I think, again, it's just a human nature to just want more for ourselves and take more, right? You see this in language as well. The more conservative you are, the more you're going to be like, you know what? I'm going to go ahead and take this word freedom, monopolize it for my own intentions, okay? I see freedom this way. I'm gonna wear a bunch of shirts that say freedom, almost as if their view of freedom is legitimate, right? Same thing with the notion of God. I feel like more progressive people are like, everyone has different gods. Conservative-minded people, more conservative-minded, are like, it's my God and only my God. This is the one true God, right? Therefore, I'm gonna wear the shirt that says God, because I'm so proud. Whereas more progressive people are like, dude, we all have different gods. There's no need to even brag about your God, okay? But it's this notion of just commandeering or monopolizing things, right? That is a more conservative, I think, tendency, right? So what I mean by getting our asses kicked is that progressives, if we fail to recognize this and just continue letting more conservative people take things and using it for their own intentions and purposes, we're going to continue to lose out, right? The world is going to just become more and more conservative, right? You have naive, absent-minded people, either teenage kids coming of age or older people, not very intellectual, not very educated. When they see the word freedom, they're going to just fall for it. When they see the word God or a cross, they're going to be like, oh, it's Jesus. You know what I mean? This has got to be right? They're not going to really think about these things. They're not going to philosophize. They're not going to question that maybe, you know, everyone has a different God, right? Maybe freedom needs to be limited, right? Certain types of freedom is okay in certain situations. Certain types of freedom is not okay, right? Anyway, so point here is, the big takeaway here, right, is that as a ultra progressive, if you are progressive and if you have any similar values to me, we have to do more with taking back our language, right? And using it, not just giving it up to conservatives. Words like freedom, words like God, right? We need to start using it. I used to tell people that I'm an atheist. And then I realized that, you know, it really depends, right? When it comes to language and using words like God and atheism, don't take for granted that we share a world with a lot of other people who have different values, different levels of intellect. So when you talk to people, when you engage with people, when you wear shirts, right? Just remember your audience. So now when I talk to someone and they ask me what my beliefs are in terms of God, I have to remind myself. I look at them like, wait, who am I talking to here? Am I talking to someone whose values are similar to mine? Whose level of intellect is something that, what is their level of intellect, right? Because it differs, right? I might have to use different words when I talk to them, okay? So in the past, I would just maybe consider myself an atheist, but I realized that doesn't really cut it to a lot of people who are less thoughtful or less intellectual, honestly, right? When I talk to someone who I think is kind of a mean person, very bigoted, mean, not very thoughtful, right? You know, like if they ask me if I believe in God, sometimes I have to remind myself, I'm like, well, first of all, what's the point of even talking to this person, right? Because there's a good chance his or her God is not even anything similar to my God, right? So might as well just, humor them and just say, yeah, sure, I believe in your God, and just walk away, right? So I am very aware of this, but at the same time, if I don't use the word God and redefine the word God based on my values, conservatives, and they abound, okay? There are conservatives everywhere, okay? They're going to continue using the word God, and if we don't use it, we lose it. They're going to use it, and people, like I said, naive people are just going to walk right into the trap, and they're going to fall for it. And not only will they use the word God, but they will use it in a very, forgive me for using this word, but very dumb, unsophisticated kind of way, right? So my suggestion is that we need to take back language, inject words like God and freedom with our values, our level of intellect, okay? And hopefully other people, especially younger people, right, or people who are redeemable, right, older people who are actually open-minded, can actually think through these things and not just see a word like freedom and be like, America, you know what I mean? No, they're gonna be like, oh wait, hold on a second, calm down. You know, what do you mean by freedom, right? Freedom, you know, for women's reproductive rights, freedom for businesses to conduct themselves without tariffs, for example, right? Like, well, what do you mean, right? Freedom to live as, I don't know, a person of color and not be afraid of getting shot, right? Freedom of, you know, I don't know, being able to live in an affordable manner where, you know, like, you know, you actually have healthcare and you're not worried about, you know, getting sick and stuff like that, right? What do you mean by freedom? So how do we achieve that kind of level of freedom, right? If you are poor and you share the roads with among other people who are wealthy, can we give them the freedom to use the roads that we help build by paying taxes? So maybe in order for us to allow people to experience freedom on the roads and use our highways a little bit more, there needs to be maybe a progressive tax, right? So that we can allow people, again, to live freely, right? Poorer people, right? Or are you thinking about freedom just for those who are wealthy and powerful, right? So anyways, again, the takeaway here is, if we don't use the word freedom, conservatives will use the word freedom. And trust me, they will manipulate other conservatives. So there are at least two types of ultra conservatives, right? Like very naive, perhaps less intellectual, less educated conservatives who will, you know, as we know, vote against their own, you know, interests because they fall for it, right? And then there are very manipulating, very calculating conservatives. I believe people like Erica Trump, whatever. They're like, just use these words and we will get their support, right? Words like freedom, you know, America, you know, patriot, that kind of stuff, right? So be careful. Again, who are you talking to? So if you're talking to someone who's calculating, manipulating, and is on the right side, like far right side, like conservative, just remember, they're probably pretty smart too. And maybe you can be like, hey, let's just put aside the gamesmanship. Let's talk intellectually. But if you're talking to someone that's, like I said, not very thoughtful, not a critical, deep thinker, right? You know, just know this is your opportunity to maybe engage with them and say, hey, I believe in freedom too, but this is where things get a little bit more complex. Let me explain to you why certain freedoms are good and certain freedoms are bad, right? So we need to use these words. In fact, my suggestion is we need to start using this kind of branding as well, okay? I have a suggestion later on. I'll talk about it on how we can start doing that. But for me, going forward, I'm not just gonna consider myself an atheist. It really depends on who I'm talking to. In fact, to this audience, who I think are probably gonna be a little bit more intellectual and more of deep thinkers, I no longer just consider myself an atheist, right? For different reasons. And I'll share that in another video, right? I truly don't consider myself an atheist because I think the deeper, the more thought I put into it, I realize I do believe in a God, right? But again, that's for another video. I don't believe in the God that a lot of right-wingers believe in, though, like Trumpers and stuff like that, right? It's a different God, I can tell you that much. Okay, so before I forget, you just reminded me of this thing, right? I will share a quote about Einstein where he talks about freedom, right? Actually, I might as well do that right now, right? Here's an Einstein quote. To be free means to be independent, not to be influenced by what others think and say. Again, to be free means to be independent, not to be influenced by what others think and say. So when I think of this quote, I think this is an example of where I am more conservative, right? I think of one of my heroes, Plato, and the Republic, where I actually don't want everyone to be free. I don't want everyone to be independent thinkers. I'm too cynical of humans. I know a lot of humans, especially very conservative humans, who fall for like conspiracy theories and they don't trust what experts say, often because they don't like what experts say, right? And so they just go and do their own research and then they start believing in their own beliefs, you know, whether or not, you know, they believe elections were stolen, you know, or what is it called, Dominion voting stuff, right? So in this case, I don't want everyone to just be free and just do your own, independent thinking. No, sometimes be humble and realize that you're probably not that well researched. So just follow the crowd and just be more conventional and think what a lot of other people have already thought out for you, right? And I do think that's a problem with our society these days. Everyone thinks they're so smart. Everyone wants to be an independent free thinker, but it comes with a lot of risk here, right? But it's true. To be free, to be truly free, means to be independent. Personally, I think only some people should try to be free, because some people have the wherewithal, the mental capacity and the discipline to try to be more independent. But others, I would suggest, I'm actually quite against that, right? But this reminds me of another Einstein quote. Einstein quote on if you can't explain something simply, right? So Einstein says very famously, if you can't, let's go with this one. If you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it well enough. Okay. So again, another quote, I think from Einstein. If you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it well enough. Well, I'm reminded of this quote because, again, language, right? You have to ask yourself, who are you talking to when you're talking to someone, right? So the way I look at it, it's like, if you're talking to someone super smart, like maybe your boss, you're like an executive, right? Who you trust is smart and perhaps smarter than you, a lot of times you should dumb it down. You should simplify it, because you know that they have the intellectual ability to process everything. At this point, they just need a summary, and they need to know that you understand it. So you have to be able to break it down simply for them. So if you're talking to someone super smart, like your boss or something, you should be able to break things down simply. Okay, that's how I would imagine language needs to be between you and someone really smart. Now, if you're talking to someone who you're trying to teach, who, with regards to something here, is not as smart as you or so, right? There are two goals now. One is you want to maybe bring them up to your level. You want to teach them, right? But two is you want to actually engage with them. So you have to do two things. You have to make it simple enough for them to understand, but you have to sprinkle in a little bit of complexity to start raising them up, right? So that their simple understanding strengthens itself and gets stronger with a little bit more complexity, right? So this idea of, again, language, when you're talking to someone like a child and you're trying to teach that child, you have to make sure you can do it in a simple manner, and then slowly complicate things if you're trying to explain to them, geometry or algebra or whatever it is, right? But again, if you're talking to someone super smart, oftentimes you want to just show them that you have the ability to simplify things and give them the simple explanation, right? That handshake looks a lot different now, right? That what you're delivering to them, right? So again, I'm just reminded of this nice Einstein quote. I say that because I was talking to my brother yesterday, and we were talking about religion, and I was like, hey, can you break it down for me in a simple way? He was like, but we're talking about something complicated, right? And I was like, yeah, but are you, what's your goal here, right? I don't know if you even understand what you're talking about, so I'm going to ask you, can you break it down in a simple way? One of the most difficult things for me, that requires a lot of intelligence, is to take something complicated and make it simple, or break it down, right? I'm not saying it's a simple thing. So if you're dealing with fractals or complex math, it's complicated. But if you can break it down and make it simple, then I know you've understood, right? And it saves me time, because now you give me an explanation in this nicely packaged thing, right? And then I will deconstruct that and I will complicate it so that I can make sure I understand it as well, right? Anyway, so just reminder of that quote. And again, this is language. So keep that in mind, right? I do think it's important because, again, when you're dealing with students or whatever, you have to know, hey, I'm going to try to make it simple enough for them to at least be able to grasp my hand. We can clutch hands, and then I'll start complicating things, at their level in which they can process, right? Anyways, okay, so a lot about language, right? Just happened to think about this quote from Einstein. I love it. If you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it well enough. Okay. All right. So let's see here. I do want to read a poem in a little bit. That's a previous poem that I read. That I wrote. Today I don't want to write any poems. I want to read a poem that I often think about when I think of language, right? And humans interacting with one another. I will read this poem in a little bit. We'll read it together. Hope you guys like it. Again, the takeaway is that as a progressive, we need to take back a lot of the symbology and the language and the, the meaning behind these words like freedom and God. Going back to Mother's Day, one of the most, I guess, mind-boggling things that I think about every now and then is just how we've come this far, and how we've come this far to often refer to God as a man. We have, with women, literally being the majority of our population. To this day, every time I talk to someone and I ask them, is God a man or a woman? Most likely they'll say God is a man, which I think is crazy, right? How did we let it get this far and be so backwards, quite frankly? I was talking to a man I know, he's in his 60s, not too long ago, maybe even a year ago. I asked him if God is a man, and he was like, it doesn't matter. God, gender or sex isn't really important. So I was like, so can we just start referring to God as a woman if it doesn't matter? Can we start calling God as a she and stuff? And he was like, no, you probably shouldn't do that. I was like, see, it doesn't, you say it doesn't matter, but truly it does matter to you, right? So what I suggest is, as progressives, again, we need to take back meaning, start referring to God as a woman, okay? And this is where you can really challenge the intellectual honesty of, people right? Like Catholics. I was raised a Catholic. I know a lot of Catholics, and they believe, Jesus's father is a man, or Jesus's father is also God, right? That's where you have to challenge it and be like, see, it doesn't make sense that God would be a man and would be a father to another God, which is Jesus, right? So can you start asking people, can you start talking about Jesus's parent as a mother? That way God is a woman. I guarantee you most people are against it. Because again, a lot of people, humans, this is my theory, right? Humans, we evolved, we created stories. For the longest time, men dominated physically and everything, right? So of course we're to make God into our own image. We say that God made us into his image. It's ridiculous. We made God into our image. And since men are the dominant sex, like for the longest time, of course, men made God into their image, right? But as a progressive, we need to take that back and be like, no. God is not a man, for one, right? God can't be a man, or it shouldn't be a man. It's up to us. That's why I don't believe I'm an atheist anymore. Like, we invented God. So if you invented God, who do you think God is? Okay. No, drive what God means. Own it. Don't let conservatives tell you what God means, okay? Let's see here. Let me take a look at my notes, right? So what I'm thinking, everyone, is that I want to make a shirt for myself on this channel, but I'm going to start wearing stuff that I never thought I would wear, like a shirt that would say freedom on it. So I'm going to make a shirt that says freedom on it, probably with this HC Harboring Chaos logo. And somewhere on that shirt, I'll probably put the words, carpe linguam, right? Which is Latin for seize the language, right? Carpe linguam, maybe on top the word freedom. That way we redefine freedom and we start using it more as progressives. Don't take it for granted. Because if we don't use that word freedom, again, conservatives will use it. They will monopolize it. They will hijack it, okay? And then people will fall for this dumb way of using freedom, right? So the goal is, if we start branding ourselves with the word freedom, and maybe this, a slogan, carpe linguam, and our slogan, harboring chaos, we'll get a few people that start thinking, oh, interesting. There are two kinds of freedoms here, freedoms from intellectuals and critically thinking people, progressives, versus this other group that believe in freedom that, I don't want to have to describe how Trumpers are, but it's like Trumpers, right? You get to choose. Which freedom do you want to to adopt, right? Same thing with maybe even a flag, like an American flag. I never thought I would just wear a shirt that has an American flag, not because I'm not proud of it. I'm proud of some things about America, like when we're being progressive and generous and stuff like that, not when we are like being super nationalistic and racist and fascist and stuff like that, right? Those, one day I'll make another video about what it means to love your country, right? Of course, we're gonna have to define what it means to love. Can't wait to do that. It's gonna be an awesome video. But so I am proud of certain things about America, not proud of other things. And it reminds me, I don't know if I said it, but again, national anthems, right? I don't know if we should create a shirt that has a national anthem on it or something, but for me, for the longest time, I've always wished that maybe at sporting events, we could have 2 national anthems, right? The first session, you know, maybe the announcer can say, please rise for the national anthem if you are a conservative. Let conservatives rise and you know, salute the national anthem. And then after that, maybe the announcers can let progressives rise and salute the national anthem as progressives, right? Because again, the national anthem, you know, that has a lot of meaning behind it. And meaning is tied to our values. You know what I mean? I would rather stand to the national anthem along with people whose values I share, right? And again, that would help, because if you were a 15-year-old kid and you see a stadium doing the national anthem or standing up to the national anthem twice, you get to see, do you want to stand with this group that looks a certain way, behaves a certain way, acts a certain way, believes a certain way, you know, with all their conspiracy theories and their bravado and their bigoted, you know, Christianity and their, you know, shouting out, you know, build a wall, and their, you know, their meanness, so to speak, right? Or do you want to stand along this group that I feel tend to be more open-minded, more science-based, more compassionate? They don't have all the answers for sure, but they're not going to lie to themselves and lie to everyone, right? And they're going to be more generous about, like I said, meaning and sharing this land and sharing even the national anthem, right? Well, we'll share it. You can have your national anthem. We'll have our national anthem, okay? Anyways, let people decide. And then I feel like if we did that, I do think, because we take back the national anthem, because we take back the word freedom, because we take back the word God, right? We take back the flag. More people will not fall for this, to me, very shallow view of the world and how we're using these terms and these words, right? Okay, so I said a lot. By the way, this video is probably, I don't know, how long is this video? Maybe even an hour long, but thanks for, you know, watching all of this. You know, if you made it this far, right? Let's finish with a beautiful poem by Walt Whitman. To me, it's a short poem, but for the longest time, every time I think about language, I do think about this poem, okay? So this poem is called A Glimpse by Walt Whitman. A glimpse through an interstice caught of a crowd of workmen and drivers in a bar room around the stove late of a winter night, and I unremarked seated in a corner. Of a youth who loves me and whom I love, silently approaching and seating himself near, that he may hold me by the hand. A long while amid the noises of coming and going, of drinking and oath and smutty jest, there we two content, happy in being together, speaking little, perhaps not a word. I think that's a beautiful poem. And I do think that Walt Whitman probably shared a lot of my values too, in a sense that I think Walt Whitman understood a lot about beauty and aesthetics. Anyways, by the way, I will do another video one day about morality and aesthetics, okay? It's a very important subject, right, in philosophy. And it goes back to this notion of values and preference. What is beauty, right? What is right? What is wrong? It's going to be a deep video. You know, and maybe it'll be during the video when we talk about love as well, right? Because there are things that they're all important, right? As humans, you know, loving a man or a woman, right? It's something that you were probably born with, right? Like your sexuality, so to speak. It's significant because we are physical species or specimen, right? But is it that important who we love, a man or a woman? What is important? And why is it beautiful to us, right? The things that we love, right? Is it just because, anyways, I won't even go into it right now. I can't wait to talk about it, right? Our sexuality, our identity and all that, right? Okay, so anyways, I hope you enjoyed this video. It's a super long video. Language is important. We need to carpe linguum, take back language. I will create some shirts. If you guys want to maybe wear the same shirts, I don't know, you need to find a way to reach me, I don't know, like commenting or something like that, right? But it's something to think about. As progressives, we need to take back these words and these images and imagery and symbols, right? Don't just let conservatives do it, right? Don't just let conservatives hog these resources, right? Okay, thanks guys. Really appreciate it. Bye.